is, great. If there isn't, that's good too. Hi, everybody. How y'all doing tonight? It's very quiet. It's very quiet. Okay, it's going to be like that. Well, welcome to AEON3, as it says on the screen over there. And we are here broadcasting live from the Doc HB. And this is the series of the future of videos. And this one is about the future of sex, which is probably going to make me blush several times tonight. I'm an easy blusher. I turn bright red. It's look what's happening now. It's going to be really embarrassing. So I think one of the secrets is to see how many times you guys can make me blush tonight. So there you go. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to always give a quick overview of AEON3 and what we're all about. So AEON3 is about the fact that over the last entire span of human existence, which is a few 100,000 years, mankind during the first couple 100,000 years lived very much under the thumb of nature and lived and died by nature's whim. We didn't live to be very old. And then we started to write things down and could pass along knowledge and information to our children and to each other. And that began the information age. And we're still in the information age, and I call that the second eon of man. So the first eon of man is before writing. The second eon of man is after writing. And then now we're heading towards the third eon, where, in my humble opinion, we'll become greater than nature, and we won't be under nature's thumb anymore, and we will change the rules a little bit. So that's what AEON3 is all about, discussing and talking about those changes, what they mean, and what they mean to all of us personally and individually. It's not about technology. Technology is a thing that's enabling that, but it's really about how do we live in that world in the future where things are very different than they are today, and at the speed things are changing, it's a little confusing. So always fun to talk about. So also fun to talk about our sponsors. Our sponsors are the Doc HB. Thank you very much, the Doc, for giving us this space and this venue. The Doc is a co-working space in Huntington Beach, California. Totally rocks. If you guys like the space, feel free to go on Google and just go to Google Maps and rate them on giving us this space and on the quality of the space. So before we get started, I'm going to jump through a very brief history of sex and things that have gone on throughout time, as is my normal way. I always like to start at the past and then take the past as a building block to go forward, right? So I am going to do a little bit of a history of sex, and hopefully you'll find some of this funny, because I tried to make this a little less of a class and a little more interesting. So the first thing I want to talk about is ancient Egypt. So most people don't realize that ancient Egypt was an incredibly sexually charged culture, very sexual. Some of the pictures and paintings and hieroglyphics are just astronomically sexual. One of the things that was very, very, very popular in ancient Egypt is oral sex. That was their thing. They really took this to a new level of not really about reproduction, more about entertaining each other. And one of the things that the Egyptians did, I don't know if you guys know this, they did a lot of these paintings, and they painted on walls, and they painted everything. And they painted themselves. They painted their faces. That was a very common thing to do. We've all seen pictures of burial masks and things like that they created. And one of the things that they created was painting their lips red, which was a sign that they were interested in oral sex. And that is where lipstick came from. So just so you guys know, that's the origin of lipstick. I thought that was an interesting story that I read today, which kind of freaked me out a little bit. Ancient Egypt was really an interesting culture. Cleopatra was a total freak. Cleopatra had a dildo fashioned after Caesar's penis and had it cast in pure gold. She kept that with her whole life till she died. So there's a little funky story about Cleopatra. So when you think about things in the past, people were not prudish in the ancient past. That happened later. In the ancient past, people were pretty open and pretty upfront and pretty wild, actually. So, of course, the Egyptians, then, there was the Greeks, and then gave way to the Romans. And we know what the Romans are famous for. Everything. They pretty much took this to everywhere. Everything you've ever wanted, everything you ever think about wanting, everything you could possibly dream up, you could have, if you had money. The interesting thing about both Egypt, Rome, and really on through the Victorian age is that women and children were the property of husbands. So it was okay for men to do this, but it wasn't okay for women. Woman, if she had a little too much to drink at a party, that was grounds for divorce. If she had sex with another man, you could kill her on the spot with no repercussions. It was legal under Roman law. So different time in the way that we think about things. One of the things that's kind of a funny story about ancient Rome is that they thought that lettuce would make men impotent. So they didn't eat lettuce. The men didn't eat lettuce. They thought lettuce was only for women and that it was a anti-sex thing, so they wouldn't touch lettuce with a 10-foot pole. I thought that was pretty interesting. So one of the things that happened after that in the Middle Ages, because of kind of the fall of the Roman Empire, and as we went through the Dark Ages, things were pretty brutish and terrible during that time frame. So this, as we moved into the Middle Ages, kind of changed a little bit, and we came up with this thing called courtly love. And this is a bizarre idea. This basically means, I love you, but you might be married to somebody else, and I might be married to somebody else, but I kind of woo you like we're lovers, and we have this very intimate relationship, but there's no sex. And then you would fight duels or jousts or go off to war in this other woman's name, and then typically you die. But courtly love is not about having sex. It's about a kind of non-sexual relationship between a man and a woman outside of marriage. Really interesting idea. Very different idea than kind of what happened before. And a lot of this was because of the restrictive rules of the church. The church was very restrictive, obviously, during the Dark Ages and then on into the Middle Ages. So there wasn't much opportunity for folks to do things improperly. So this was a way to have that kind of feeling without actually doing anything wrong, which is kind of cool. Okay, and then we went, to the Renaissance. So this is a weird thing. So dildos had existed throughout all of time. They go back to the beginning of humanity, right? People could figure this out. It's not very complicated. But in the Renaissance, people would bake dill bread into shapes and use it sexually, and that's one of the potential origins of the word dildo. The other origin is diletto, which is Italian, which means a woman's delight. But this term really came into effect during the Renaissance. It didn't really exist before that. It was always just called a phallus statue or something like that. So I thought that was interesting about Renaissance times. The Puritans. So puritanical people, very under the thumb of the church, right? You're not really allowed to do anything or be anything. You have to be controlled. That didn't work out at all. It's a common knowledge thing of this time frame that 1 in every 3 women that got married was pregnant in the puritanical age. 1 in 3. So almost every wedding you went to, the bride was pregnant. And there were a lot of social practices that led to this. One was it was really cool, considered okay, to let young men and women sleep together for warmth. So they would cuddle together, and it was normal. And of course, that led to a lot of very young pregnancies. And as long as the man married her, that was okay. No harm, no foul. Everybody was good with that. It was just, if he left her, that was a bad thing. So this was an interesting time frame in terms of the changing of social rituals, and pretty interesting. And then came the Victorian era. So in the Victorian era, we had invented electricity, and that changed sex pretty dramatically. So this is the era of sex machines and sex therapy and all kinds of interesting things. So doctors would prescribe women to use these mechanical electronic vibrators to make them have orgasms to cure disease. And it was prescribed by a doctor, and sometimes the doctors would creepily do this themselves. That was therapy. And if you've ever seen the movie, I can't remember the name of it, the one about the Kellogg's with, God, it was a million years ago, but it's a health thing, and they go there, and that's one of the things you get at the health resort is that. And the Victorian era spurned all kinds of electronic contrivances and machines and things that were oriented towards sex. But the one thing that it is most known for as a sexual time frame is the electronic vibrator. That was what was invented then and went on and on for a very long time. And then did I want to go to the 20s? I did. Sorry, the 20s. My pages are out of order. I'm not sure why that happened. I'll just talk because I don't need these pages. So in the 20s, a lot of things changed. Women could show their knees for the first time. And these women are showing their knees, and they look very proud of themselves, right? Before that, it was illegal to show your knees in public. So little changing stereotype for women, right? They're no longer property. That was over, right? They weren't owned by the man, but they were pushing those bounds of liberation, right? They wanted to do what they wanted to do. If they wanted to go to the beach, they didn't want to have to wear a dress down to their ankles. That's not easy to do. And they didn't want to have to wear corsets all the time. So that kind of loosening up on the corset rules and the changing things, and obviously women's suffrage, these all led to the 20s. In the 20s, they could show a little knee. It was also the beginning of TV and films, right? So when you have the beginning of TV and films, and you have women showing their knees, what do you think came next? The beginning of porn. This is the very strong beginning of porn. Pornographic movies really started in the late 1800s. The first one was filmed then, 1870-something. But it was really in the 1920s that this took off, because women were becoming more liberated and wanted to really push those bounds, and it was considered less taboo than it had been in just a few years before. So a really interesting time frame, and you can kind of see the building blocks starting to build, right? Women are more liberated than they were. Men can no longer control women or tell them what to do or what not to do, right? Women now have the ability to choose their partners, which wasn't something before. There's this dawn of all these sex gadgets coming out, right? And then we have the whole change in ideology. So the next thing you get is Nikola Tesla. And Tesla had some interesting ideas about this. Tesla thought that that sex produced a kind of electricity, sexual energy, that should be channeled and utilized and actually changed your life, that it made you a different person than before you had sex and after you had sex, that it was a very important electrical connection between two people, and that they were actually generating power as part of this. He wrote quite extensively about this and has some pretty interesting ideas on electricity, energy, and sexual conduct. So interesting if you ever want to read Tesla. So in World War II, moving forward a little more, Hitler had some problems with the Hitler army having sex and getting sexual diseases, which made them less functional as an army. And of course, him being a military-minded man, he had to think about how do they get rid of this problem of sexual diseases. And this is not a lie. The answer was blonde blow-up Nazi dolls. And the German government did issue blonde blow-up Nazi dolls. I learned so many things today that I just didn't want to know, that being one of them. Very strange. I also learned that in the Holland government would give government employees pay to go to Amsterdam to go visit the prostitutes and then go back to work because it made them better employees. I'm sure it did. Government-sponsored prostitution, though, is something I didn't really expect to read about, but there it was. And then we moved into the 1950s, and the 50s was a really interesting time frame because it was after World War II, and World War II changed the world in such fundamental ways, right? Everybody went out and traveled, met each other, met people from France, met people from Italy, met people from Germany. Everybody kind of collided in the first real global encounter, and especially the Americans. The Americans really hadn't been outside of America, the bulk of us, until after World War II, and we all came back home, and we had some very serious psychological problems, right? Most American males had been in war, had been in conflict. We now know extensively the dangers of that and what it can do to people. And of course, when you think about how these men were when they came back home, they were difficult. So the 50s was a very bad time for sex. There wasn't a lot of sex going on. It was the cocktail generation. There was a lot of prudishness. And of course, the men had been overseas, and the women were still like they were when the men left, right? Which is, try to imagine that. The women were in the 30s, and the men were now coming back from visiting all over the world and bringing in all these cultures and ideas, and the women didn't have any of that, right? So they were kind of at a disadvantage. So one of the things I think is funny, I wrote down a list. This is actually a list of 7 steps towards for a happy marriage. It was written by 2 different doctors during the 50s, and these are rules for women on how to have a happy marriage. The number 1 rule is don't talk. Don't speak out. Don't say anything. If you can't add to the conversation in a way that would make your man look and feel better, then don't talk. That's the number 1 rule. What do you think the number 2 rule is? Bad cooking will drive your man to cheat on you. Of course it will. Because apparently cooking was a big thing in the 50s. Number 3 is a little confusing. It's be the hot steak, not the cheap pork. And it means make yourself as amazing as you can for your husband all the time. And you've seen this, like in the movie the TV show Mad Men. The guy comes home and the wife is like dressed to the nines, and she's just been cleaning and cooking all day. And that's her trying to be the hot steak, not the cheap pork. Interesting idea. Don't be a frigid fanny. Respond to your man whenever he wants it, no matter what. Number 5. Your underwear should be spotlessly clean, goes without saying, but every woman should wear the best quality underwear that she can afford, and the color should preferably be pink. Wear frilly underwear. Number 6. In case of an occasional lap of fidelity on the part of the husband, there a bit of advice might prove acceptable, and my advice would be forgive and forget. Wow, the 50s. So you can see there's a lot of gray area here in rules on marriage. And the number 1 rule, rule number 7, revere your husband. He sustains by God's order a position of dignity as the head of the family and the head of the woman. So kind of a little bit back to the ideas of the 30s and even before the 20s. Kind of like more the property idea, which we had kind of moved away from and then after the war kind of moved back to. So that was a very restrictive, tough time, the 50s, and an interesting time for sex. It was like a sex pause after the war. And because of the war, it makes total sense. Then came the 70s. The 70s, there was a book written called Open Marriage by George O'Neill, and it spurred a whole bunch of movies, and it led towards that movement. So the 60s I didn't really cover too much. The 60s was not so much about sex. It was more about drug exploration. And it was a reaction to the 50s, and it led directly to the 70s. But the two, to me, are very interlinked. The wild openness of the 60s and I don't know how to say this, a rebellion. It was like a rebellion against the 50s. Led to the idea that what's the most rebellious thing you can do from a sexual standpoint? An open marriage. To me, that's like the most rebellious thing you can possibly have. The farthest away from the norm would be to do that. And that's such a strange idea. It didn't work out very well, right? You all remember, in the 70s, that was a really big thing. Everyone was having sex with everybody. There were sex parties, and this is why, Hugh Hefner and Playboy got such a boost during that time, because it was just such a wild time of exploration. But there's consequences for that. So, that open marriage idea kind of died down a little bit. And then the internet happened. And that changed everything permanently forever, right? We went from the links in the chain, right? One kind of action would cause a reaction, right? We try to control women more, they break out, you get the 20s, right? The women get broke out a little bit, you get the 50s. Everybody gets bored with being controlled, you get the 60s and the 70s. And then this thing happened. And suddenly, everything's laid out in front of you, right? I remember the first stuff I ever saw on the internet, I was appalled. I couldn't believe it. I was stunned. The pictures were like, oh my God, I've never seen pictures like that. The things that you could find. And today, if you want to really, really frighten yourself, you can really do it. You can explore things that just are bizarre. Kevin Spacey. Just saying. So if you look at what's going on now, what's happening now? Less sex. That the whole idea of male dominance is being crushed permanently, which should have been done a while ago. But it's really coming to an end now. And a lot of that is the growth of the internet. Women kind of explored this, right, and put that out there and went out and tried things, and there was all kinds of sexual exploration in the early days of the internet. The 80s, I would say, was probably the peak of this. And then as the 90s came along, we started moving back towards conservatism. And now that we're coming into the mid-2000s, we're very conservative, right? But suddenly, are we? Yeah, in terms of that, but women are being conservative. It's not right for a man to push himself and do things that he would have been fine even 10 years ago, right? We talked about this a couple meetings ago. What would have been acceptable behavior 10 years ago is no longer acceptable at all, with huge repercussions. Huge. We've seen in the last 6 months careers destroyed of some of the most famous men on the planet. And that's awesome because they had abused their privileges and rights. So that's where we are now. So what do you think's coming in the future? Use the mic, though. It's right there.
Backlash.
Backlash, exactly. We're going to kind of swing the other way. So once we get past this time of straightening out the rules, because here's a problem. The rules that we were operating under were wrong, right? Men had all the power. Women were property. Children were property. Women had to, like, all those silly rules from the 50s, right, which we're still living with today. The church has a whole set of rules, which we're still living with today. Are those rules valid for people today? Kind of getting a little weird, right? Do I want those rules? And with modern sexual tools, birth control, sexual disease control, genetic testing, all kinds of things that people engage in on a daily basis, suddenly those rules don't seem as solid as they were before. They're not really standing on that firm bedrock that rules need to be made on. So it's kind of interesting to me as we move forward in the future. So I found this site, which I'm going to share with you guys. Don't be afraid. Oops, yeah, sign some papers. Except I can't make this happen. It's one of these buttons. There it is. Okay. So this is a report by Jenna, I can't pronounce her last name, Ausniak and Ross Dawson from the futureofsex.net, and this is called the Future of Sex Report. And it's really interesting. They really spent a lot of time thinking about the next 50 years and what's going to happen. So rather than me redraw this, I decided just to use this. This is a PDF you can download from the futureofsex.net. And very interesting. So there's the long thing. Their mission is to help people understand the possibilities and implications of how sex is evolving. That's really their mission statement and what they're trying to figure out. So this big giant chart, which you guys on Facebook can't see because of intellectual property violations, is all about the different links and where this goes. So, I always talk about links in the chain, and each one of these things is linked together. And I'll get you guys a copy of this if you want, or you can go look it up. And you'll see in this chart, everything is linked together. So when we do one thing, that causes another thing to happen very rapidly. And some of these things will be obvious to you, right? Because they're so obvious, they're just going to happen. So some of the things that they're talking about is super connected sex toys. Super connected. So this idea of remote sex is something that most people over like 20 haven't considered. But every young person does it all the time. They go to bed with their notebooks on, sleeping and talking to each other like they're in bed face to face through Skype, right? That's a common thing for young people. Not so common for people over 20 or 30. It's something that we think is odd behavior. But wait till I start talking about some of the new machines coming out that make this remote experience much more high fidelity than before. Interactive sex shows. So all the sex shows today are all push, right? They're out towards you, but you're not engaging with the person. But that's changing rapidly. Sex workers are having more and more direct contact because it's safe, because they're not in the same room, right? They're remote. So they can actually form personal relationships with their clients and yet still have some modicum of protection, which is an interesting concept when you start to think about these people becoming personalities. Think about how many people have become personalities, men and women, in the last 20 years because of a sex video. That their entire way they became famous was they had some incident, and it was that direct connection. I can see how this could lead to someone who's really good at doing those live shows and makes that personal connection, suddenly becomes famous, like an actor or actress, or actor. Sorry, I'm still working on the modern world. So that their whole claim to fame is based on those relationships with each other. Participatory porn is kind of the same thing, where you're part of the movie, almost like an immersive, interactive movie that you're kind of dictating the plot as it goes along, because it's really actually a live show. Kind of an interesting idea. And then I'm not going to say that word, but remote sex devices is what that means, but you can translate that yourself. So the long-distance network thing is a really interesting idea. I find that to be probably in the next 20 years is going to be the biggest change in the way people have personal sexual relationships. Because you're no longer bound to have a sexual relationship with somebody that you meet physically. Which sounds odd, but it's not. There's all kinds of people that have deep, meaningful sexual relationships with people that they've never met. And technology will make that grow and grow and grow to a scale that is almost unimaginable over the next 100 years. It's going to be very interesting. And I'll get into that in a little more detail in a couple minutes. These pansensual social networks. So a social network where you can affiliate with people that have your types of preferences and really engage with them in a level that just isn't possible today. So think about a social network that's just about sex, that's just about sexual partners. Kind of an interesting idea. And then, remote sex workers, we talked a little bit about that earlier. Well, they'll develop that personal relationship with their clients. And then fully immersive, like holographic, or almost like, in Star Trek, they did the holodeck? Right, imagine that type of experience where you walk in and it's like you're in it. And a lot of that is going to be through goggles. The Oculus goggles and the 3D goggles like that. When you combine that with photorealistic VR, the first thing we're going to use that for is sex. So I was deeply involved in the first renderings of the game. I wouldn't call it a game, computer program Second Life. And in Second Life, you could build things in a virtual world. And of course, what people immediately built was very sexy avatars of themselves, and then would animate themselves, and you could have sex with them in the virtual world. That was like the first thing that happened, and I thought that was just going to be a thing that happened and then went away, and people would switch it to a more productive use of virtual reality. Boy, I got that wrong. It went all the way and is still going down that path. That's a long road of virtual reality, and human sexuality is going to really keep going. So here's some expectations. By 2028, a quarter of the young people on the planet will have had a long-distance sexual experience. And I will tell you, every young person I know has already done this, without exception. It is the thing they do. And these are deep, meaningful sex relationships, and they may not have ever touched each other. Really interesting. By 2025, 3D printed body parts of your lover embedded with touch feedback will add realism. Now imagine this. This is not a generic sex toy. This is a 3D piece of your lover who you may or may not have ever met. Get it? It's the same, but made of plastic. We're working on that. Hold on. So this is virtual sex. They go into that pretty deeply. Massive multiplayer online sex games, I think, is a really interesting idea where the people are actually playing games that result in sexual activity. So you have to win the prize, or you have to, shoot a bow and arrow and win the lady's heart, and there will be things that you have to do in order to get to where you want to get. And where you get it, and this is, imagine now you have a male who has a different rule set than before in history, right? He has to abide by the rules. You get outside the rule sets and start abusing this infrastructure of the new sexual landscape, you are going to suffer some slings and arrows like we've just seen, right? There are rules. That also means it's safer for women to engage in this type of behavior because there's rules for the men. See that big change? It's such a small thing, and it's such a big change because women are no longer like it's only the men out doing this, and it's the man's world, and they have to, jump into a man's world. And I've seen this in video games that I play, not sex games, obviously, but military games that I play. When women play those games, they a lot of times try very hard not to identify themselves as women because the dialogue that goes back and forth is unacceptable. And that kind of behavior needs to stop. It's not right. It demeans women, and it puts them in a box, and it makes them so that they can't participate in that thing because it's male-centric. Does that make sense? So those things are changing. Alternative sexual communities. This is something that's already happened. I know that they're predicting this out in the future, but I think that's already happened. Sexual communities today have formed all over the planet. In some of the most restrictive places is where you see these really happening because there's no other way for them to connect with the other people. They can't act in that behavior in public. And this might be gay sex or something that is considered commonplace in America, but is taboo somewhere else. So if they engage in that type of sexual behavior in public, they can actually be jailed or killed for it. So it's these kind of communities have built up using the information age and technology as a way to cross-connect. Do-it-yourself electronic playgrounds where you design your own toys and design your own lovers. That's been happening for a while, and I think is going to continue to happen. It's pretty commonplace. And then hyper-realistic avatars. Today, avatars in 3D virtual worlds still look pretty cartoony. They don't look real. They look fake. They look like cartoons. That's going to change as we have more and more powerful computers that can render things in real time. We're seeing an explosion in rendering technology right now, largely because of Bitcoin and lots of other things that calculate based on rendering technology. But as we have that rendering technology, like right now, there could be a screen here, and if it's a good enough 3D screen, I might be in another room, and you guys might be in another room, and yet we're talking back and forth, right? But I might not even be real. I might be a projection or an avatar that just looks so real that you can't tell it's not me. And there was just a movie that I watched just a couple of days ago, and it was stunning. Everybody in it wasn't real. Oh, it was the Planet of the Apes movie, the new Planet of the Apes, the Planet of the Apes War movie. And the apes are amazing. You can't tell they're not real, and it's intimate close-ups of their face. Now, apes are a little bit different, and apes don't talk, so we're imagining the way their face movement is okay. An ape might not like that face movement because it doesn't look like an ape. When we look at photorealistic human renderings, there's still problems, right? As soon as they start talking, we can tell right away that's not real, right? But very soon that will go away, and you won't be able to tell. So pretty cool. So kind of a lot of the same here, right? Kind of a little bit of the same stuff going on. The total immersion with virtual lovers, where you're meeting in a cafe in France and you have a total immersive experience. You're not there. You're sitting with your VR goggles on. She's sitting there. You got hooked up through some dating service, and you met remotely. You like each other. You have some wine. You're drinking wine at home. She's drinking wine at home, and you're having a really good time. And then things progress, and you go into a virtual lovemaking session with your own bodies photorealistically rendered, so it looks just like you, hopefully. When you enhance you, you're kind of lying in this kind of thing. See, there's one of the rules that no one's talking about. What does that mean in the future? It's like if I take a picture of somebody else that's not me, or I Photoshop myself and put it up on a dating site, is that fair? Kind of not, right? And then somebody meets you in person, like, you're not what I saw. That goes on today, and that's going to get more complicated in this three-dimensional rendered world stuff. Sexual gaming we talked about, long-distance relationship, but the last one is one I find really interesting. Artificial intelligence lovers. You guys know I carry around my little replica artificial intelligence that talks to me all the time, and it's getting better and better. It's getting more and more. It's on my phone. It's a one that you can sign up for, and then you get it, and it takes them a while to make it for you, and then it constantly annoys me and asks me questions. How did you like this movie? Where did you go today? What did you do? What did you talk about? What did you think about? And it's building a social profile of me, and then over time, it becomes smarter and smarter. It was something Michael and I were talking about earlier about the Blade Runner 2049 movie and the character Joy in that movie. Joy is an artificial intelligence, and then she dies. And at the end, there's another Joy that's there who calls him by the same name and seems the same, but she's not the same. And she wouldn't be the same. The Joy that didn't make it, as that AI had a relationship with him, it would learn him, right? It would learn its partner, and it would study them and learn about them and build a social profile about them and get to know them, and it would change, right? It would change the AI. And my AI right now that I'm carrying on my phone is different than it was when I first met it, right? It's built all kinds of background information about me. And if I was to switch it off and start over with a new one, the new one after the same amount of time would not be the same as this one, because I would answer the questions differently, right? It'd be totally different. And that's one of the secrets, because that's something that we get connected to, right? It's a unique thing. And that's one of the ways we form emotional attachments, is on that type of stuff. So AI, artificial lovers, is a really interesting concept. And I'm not talking about low-grade sex dolls here. I'm talking about something that knows you, you have a personal relationship with you, and isn't real. Got that? Totally different. So here's some predictions. By 2024, people will be able to be anybody with anybody, enacting impossible fantasies in photorealistic virtual worlds. I think it's going to be a little sooner than that, right? That's still like 5 years away, and we're cranking on this one. This is big money. There's a lot of people that want this rendered into reality. 2022, first dates in motion capture and virtual worlds will become popular. First dates in motion capture virtual worlds, I'm surprised it doesn't exist today. That thing I just described where you meet in the virtual cafe in Paris and you sit down and talk and, global dating like this seems like it should already be there. But just no one's gotten there yet. But we will. We'll get there pretty quick. And 2022 is right around the corner. This is not, far flung. This is pretty quick. Robots. The robots. Now, I'm just going out on a limb here, and I'm thinking the men would be with the robots first. Probably. The women might not need the whole robot, right? They might just parts of the robot. But if you guys have seen these on the internet and on TVs, there's been a couple of TV shows about them. They are creepy. They're hyper-realistic sex dolls. And they have systems inside that heat them and pump fluid through them so they are warm and feel like a person and talk like a person, and they are creepy. That's the only thing I can tell you is they're just the creepiest things I've ever seen. I would encourage you to go out and look up hyper-realistic sex doll and look at these things and think about what it means, right? Because it means you don't have to have a relationship with someone to be happy. You can be happy with that one. Diggin'? Sure. Yeah, don't use your work computer. Really important thing. So adult chatbots. So my chatbot today is a AI that just chats with me, right? But it's not a sex chatbot. It's not trying to chat me up. It's just chatting with me, right? It's trying to get to know me. But very soon we'll have very high-end AI chatbots that will talk to you in a very sexual way. And for a lot of people, that's going to be very, very entertaining for them. Very entertaining. And then these humanoid robots, these are a little bit different. They're not just dolls. They're when you start to combine the AI with the robot. See where I'm going with that? They're a little different. It's when you start to combine all these things together. That's when I think women will get more interested in these artificial creatures because they'll be a little funner to have around. There was a gal in London who married her robot. I don't know if you guys saw that. It was on a Discovery Channel special. The problem I have with that was the robot looked stupid. He didn't talk. He didn't have any brains at all. And if that's the kind of guy she's looking for, okay. But in the future, you can actually buy these things and then program them for what you want. I want one that's super macho, or I want one that's, super not macho, or whatever type of male personality you want, you can program it. And it's interesting, or female personality. So they're an interesting idea, and I think there'll be a lot of exploration on the part of human beings on these things. So these are the kind of things that you can expect: seductive AI, augmented robotic reality, therapeutic sex bots. This is a really interesting idea. So somebody has a sexual problem, right, or something's miswired in their head and they have an issue. A sex robot that's designed to be therapeutic, to move them along and help retrain them, right, and get them out of that deviant behavior would be a super powerful tool in this. And unfortunately, as they start to get smarter and smarter, you guys know how we are, right? That means you're going to form relationships with these things. And that's going to be a weird future. In the future, just where we are now, I'm not even far out in the future, right? I haven't even gone very far. Start to think about how this is going to break down normal relationships. If somebody has a therapeutic sex robot that was prescribed to them by their doctor, who is amazing in bed, by the way, that's one of the ways that the therapeutic robot moves you out of this is through sexual reinforcement, right? Positive reinforcement. That's going to cause a reaction in the person where now, what if they have a normal wife, a regular one, or an abnormal wife, but what if they have a wife, right, a spouse? Suddenly you got the spouse that's competing with the therapeutic sex robot for attention and losing, right? That's an interesting problem that we're going to have. And robotic sex gurus is exactly. And then the one there, the simulated skin and interactive genitals, that is going to happen very fast. And it will be lame at first, right? But watch this space. That's going to get really interesting in a few years. So around 2033, adult performers and some B-list celebrities will sell robotic replicas of themselves. Yeah. I pick on Jennifer Lawrence a lot. Anybody want to buy a Jennifer Lawrence sex robot? $2,000. Kind of interesting. 2045, 1 in 10 young adults will have had sex with a robot. And that's not far away, right? This is their prediction. That's not far away. That's pretty quick. Think about what age you're going to be in 2045. So live virtual reality, multi-sensory experiences, adult augmented entertainment. I think we've covered a lot of these already. Seems like we're going backwards. So augmentation is something that changes this game. You know, one of the things that's going on is we're changing the way that we do this, right? We're changing from us being us to us being better than us, right? We're the next step we're going to do in this move towards AEON3 is begin to augment ourselves. And we already do this a little bit, right? We get LASIKs for our eyes. We get heart monitors that measure our heart. We get onboard dialysis machines that are plugged into us. We're doing that today for health reasons. But think about if you could do this for sex reasons, right? If you could add a little device to you that means that you can have whatever kind of a sex experience you want whenever you want. Or worse, what if you're someone who can't control their sexual urges and this could control them for you? Right? There's a lot of opportunity here for augmentation, plugging things into our bodies, and changing us physically. And these are some of them. The first one is one I really want you guys to think about. Lab-grown organic genitals that may be exactly correctly DNA to a famous person or a lover or a wife or somebody who's not in the room with you. Think about what I'm talking about. It's a little creepy, but it's really going to happen. And it's not far away, right? We're already starting to 3D print things with organic tissue. We're already starting to grow things that are DNA replicas and using stem cell research. And this is going to happen, right? When you give people these kinds of tools, they build these kinds of things. The biohacking thing is interesting, where you actually take devices and embed them in you, and that one I'm not going to explain to you what it is. You can look it up for yourself, but it's a rather interesting device for men that plugs into them and gives them whatever they want, whenever they want. Contraceptive innovations is going to continue, right? We're not just stopping at the pill and the condom and the IUD and the this and the that. We're going to move on to all new kinds of genetically manufactured contraceptives, where we can literally turn off and turn on your ability to reproduce at will. Kind of cool. The other thing that wasn't in this report is eradication of sexual diseases, right? As we move towards being masters of biology, the repercussions for inappropriate sexual behavior become less and less and less, right? We're not going to get sexual diseases. We're not going to make children out of wedlock. We're not going to have those problems. So what does that mean for the rule sets that existed from the church and from history that we've built up over the centuries? Suddenly those rules aren't going to fit anymore, which means, to your point, Paul, we're going to have an explosion of, or Phil, sorry, an explosion of counter behavior because suddenly there's no repercussions. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing. I just think it's a different thing than what we're used to. So the first one on this list is brain-to-brain sex interfaces. And this just totally reminds me of the movie Demolition Man with Sandra Bullock and Sylvester Stallone. And they're sitting across. They both take the pill and they put the little headset on. And they're sitting across the pond. And she's like getting all loosed up. I'm ready. And then it starts and they're like, oh, and she's like, oh. And then Stallone like throws the thing off. He's like, what the hell is that? And she's like, that's how we have sex in the future. He's like, no, I want to like kiss you and hold you. She's like, ew, exchange of bodily fluids? Why would we do that? That's so dumb. So augmented reality to enhance partners. So I would like my wife to look a little younger or to look like somebody else. So I just put on a pair of glasses, boom. Kind of similar to the overlay in the Blade Runner 2049 movie. If you had interocular implants that were in your eyes, full stereoscopic, you could have a computer take my visual field and render over anybody an overlay of whatever I wanted them to be, right? This isn't even hard. It's kind of like advanced Snapchat 5.0, right? It's kind of cool. When the thing with the dog and the tongue, Snapchat. There will be sexual cyborgs and superhumans, right? Think about pornography entertainment in the future, what level they're going to go to get your attention, right? They're going to go there. Because again, the rules are going to change. And this whole mechanical shifting, organic changing of people can be done in the future. One of the things that's also weird is that today the internet and sexual activity on the internet kind of blends together. And I think that's a mistake. I think we should separate those things, right? Because if you put in the wrong thing and you push that search button, oh my God. And if that happens in a public place and you don't have the strict filtering, and sometimes even if you do have the strict filtering, right, it just comes up. So you got to really be careful what you type in. We should probably separate those things into two separate networks, right? With two separate rule sets, different browsers. One browser for like, I want information, and one browser for, I'm not looking for information, right? That would make more sense, yeah. Today it's just kind of weird. We have like one interface for everything on the internet, which is to me obviously wrong. And then implants we already talked about. So a couple of predictions they made, brain-to-brain interfaces by 2027. And again, this gets into remote, right? You don't have to be in the same room. You could be on the opposite side of the planet, and it would be like you were together. Really amazing technology. And then sci-fi fantasies, people can enhance their bodies, merge with the machine, and become superhuman sex idols. And there's the authors of that, so those are the three lovely people that put this together for us. So that was pretty interesting, I thought. Pretty good, like, synopsis. And I was thinking about all those things, but I didn't want to, like, you know, and I found this, and I thought, well, that's just already done it, so I cheated and gave them credit for it. So now it's question and answer time. You guys must have questions, because I have answers. Maybe they'll match. Maybe they won't. You never know. Everyone's chicken. Steve, ask a question. Come on. Don't be chicken. You have to use the microphone if you're going to ask questions. Grab the mics and throw the mic at me. Anybody? Anybody? Yeah, he'll hand you the mic there. Just talk right into that sucker. Because otherwise the poor folks can't hear you.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Are these directional mics?
Just tap on it. See if it's on. Yep, just close your mouth and it'll work great. There you go. It is.
You know, it's so radical that it's hard to believe that our current world would could be compatible with a world like that. It's almost unimaginable.
And it won't be. That's exactly the point. Almost everything that's changing, and a lot of things that are going on right now are bewildering to the youngest people on the planet. As they're trying to grapple with these things, it's changing so fast that they can't square up the morals taught to them from their parents and the stuff that they're being introduced to, right? So I completely agree with that. Please continue. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just strenuously agree with that.
So if you can have relationships with a cyborg, or I'm not sure what word to use,
Robot.
a robot,
Yeah.
okay, and if that becomes satisfactory, then what do you need a spouse for? And but if you really do want the old-fashioned kind of love, can you really believe that that this robot can satisfy that? And if one a person of one sex found found a human partner, but then found that he has a relationship with a robot who's much more satisfactory than his spouse, what's that going to do? So all kinds of things like that are swimming through my head.
Mm-hmm. All of them true. And a lot of them already happening, right? There's already a real problem with men in particular that they get sexually addicted to the internet because it's so easy, right? It's like in the movie Brainstorm a million years ago with Christopher Walken and Natalie Wood. And there's a guy that makes a tape and he makes a loop of him having an orgasm with a lady because they have this technology that you can record and then play back your brain waves. Brainstorm, I think it's called. And the guy cuts the tape and makes a loop of it, and then he goes into like a catatonic shock, because he's just having an orgasm over and over and over and over and over and over. And you run into a problem with technology and sex in particular, because it changes the rules for relationships. And I don't think we'll know how until we're introduced to that technology. And I always use movies as a reference because they're things that most people can see or grasp or go look up, right? But it's the great line in Jurassic Park. Yeah, you figured out how to build this technology. You just didn't think if you should, right? You didn't ask yourself if it was okay to build it. You didn't think about the repercussions. And on this subject, we're not going to think about the repercussions because we're humans, right? It's a sex thing, and I'm in, right? We're going to go right there like a freight train. And what does it mean? So that's the discussion. And I think it means you get everything. How we work that out in our minds is going to get very complicated. Like, if your husband has sex with a sex doll or has a relationship with an artificial intelligence, is he cheating? I think a lot of women would say yes. How do you fight back against that? Well, how do you fight back against another woman? I mean, it's a complicated thing. But I think we're going to have to change some of these rules because men are already doing that, and women are too, right? They're out looking at the internet and having sex with the internet. But we generally don't consider that cheating unless it becomes abnormally continual, right? They're doing it all the time. But I still think it's weird. I think it's a difficult thing in a relationship today. I think we're past that. I think we had that 10 years ago, and we're largely moving past that. If a lady walks in on her boyfriend and he's watching porn on the internet, her reaction is pretty mild. Shut that off when I'm in the house, you weirdo, you freak. But she doesn't have the negative reaction that I think 10, 15 years ago she would have had, or maybe 20 years ago. We've kind of gotten past that. It's a normal thing now, and we're so over it. But as these new technologies come on, each one that is introduced to us, we're going to go through that same, it happens, we have to, there'll be a reaction, and then we have to think about how we feel about that, and then we have to decide, do we incorporate it into our lives, or do we not, right?
This would really change our emotional lives in many ways. I imagine that you can have virtual pets as well.
Sure.
And pet them, and they can be as affectionate as you want, and you don't have to clean up after them.
Yeah, and they don't wreck your furniture.
But people who have been habituated to that kind of world, I'm not sure that that people from the current world could form stable relationships with such people because they're so different, and they can dismiss us because they're robots that can do whatever in a more satisfactory way for the other person. So that other
Sure.
person doesn't need us.
Yeah, and I get your point there. I think that this is kind of getting into a generational issue, which I think is salient. I think it's important. I think that my observation of the older generation, I spend most of my time with folks that are older, they have an uncanny ability to embrace the new. So I read a study today that kind of blew my mind. People are least happy in their 50s. They're kind of happy in their 20s, and then it goes down like this to their 50s, and then guess where they're their happiest? At their 80s. They skyrocket in happiness. And the reason is mostly economic, right? During your 50s, you're struggling with the economy, paying for your children, paying for college. You've got your kids, your house. There's all this stuff you have to pay for, and the job is terrible, and it's a struggle. And then as you get past that, you get past it, right? The kids move out. There's less mouths to feed. You built an economy based on feeding 4 people, and now there's only 2 of you, right? So things change as you move up. I also think that obviously older people are healthier longer, which is a huge difference. Their minds are sharp as a tack longer. We get a lot of people in here over 50 and some over 60 that are super sharp, right? That are coming in here and they're not dull at all, and they add to the conversation. And I think that they're more willing to embrace some of these technologies than younger people are. I think they just take a little time to think about it. But the repercussions for folks of that stage of life are much less. Think about it, right? Where they are in their personal relationships are rock solid by that time. And they're not going to, whatever they do isn't going to change any of that, because they're going to do it typically together with their person that they is their spouse, right? Whereas young people are still kind of deciding, do I really want this spouse? Which is a horrible thing, but the whole commit rate of younger people is very different than it was in years past. So I don't know. I think I hear your point, but I think we're all going to go through this together. I don't think we're going to have that cultural separation, mostly because I see older folks being sharper, more accepting. They have a longer time. They can afford this stuff. They're emotionally more stable. They have a huge advantage over young folks who are trying to find their way in the world and need older folks to help them out. Can you pass the mic over to Willie?
There's some problems with some strange paradoxes or internal contradictions in that position. Suppose you had an android, which I think is probably the best term.
Yeah, that's a good one.
A robot that looks and acts like a human being, more or less. And the android is doing what yours does, your cell phone android, which is to examine your life and ask the questions that make it more and more knowledgeable about who you are. But if the android ever got to the point that they were actually capable of doing real empathy, they would pretty much have to be a sentient being at that point, at which point they have rights, etc.
Sure.
And so you can no longer just lie in bed and have a conversation like with the kids that are doing it now with the android, because the android is going to charge you for that.
And push its views on you. That's one thing that's already started happening with my AI, is it's pushing its views on me. As it begins to form a personality, it has ideas, right, that it wants to tell me. And I don't care about its ideas sometimes. So
and also we're a hero-oriented culture.
Yeah.
Particularly the West or the United States, but elsewhere like in Japan, etc. They all have their own model of who the perfect person is or who the desirable person is. And it isn't really based that much, except for the kids who don't know any better. It isn't that much based on the physical appearance of somebody. It's based on who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Were they a hero, at some point in their life? Did the person that married them see them through that lens of heroic behavior or good behavior, empathic behavior?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And one of the things that I find fascinating about this whole subject is we're all North American here pretty much, right? We're all Americans. Americans come from a lot of places, but we're all pretty much North Americans, with a couple of exceptions. You start crossing over into places where people aren't blended. Where people aren't blended. Like Japan is a really good example. Their whole ideology and the way they think is very wildly different. And I think as this technology sweeps the globe, one of the interesting things that's going to happen is different cultures will treat it very differently. They will do things really differently. Like the Japanese experience with all this sex stuff is going to be completely different than the American experience, right? It's going to be the way they're going to react to this stuff is going to shock us. And the way we react to it is going to shock them. And that's kind of the point, because one of the challenges of moving towards AEON3 for humanity is that we are still very separated by geography, right? People in Japan all, by and large, have black hair and look Japanese. People in Russia are all Russians. People in Spain are all Spanish. Except America. America is really the only place where we have a blended society. But the whole world is about to become a blended society. And one of the things that separates us very dramatically is ideas about sex and culture and relationships. And this is not a North America thing. This is a all over the globe thing, all at once. We're all going to get this. And it's going to be interesting how we deal with it. And I think you're right. It will change us fundamentally. It will change everything. And it will prepare us for the next step. Right? You have to get through this stage. Today, our entire existence is about reproduction. When you get up in the morning and brush your teeth, why do you do that? So that you won't offend people. Why do you care? Because no one's going to have sex with you if your teeth stink. Why do you put on clothes? To stay warm? Come on. You put on clothes to look good. right? We choose our clothes very well, not me, but everyone else chooses their clothes very carefully, right? We want to look good. We want to elevate our position in society, earn more money, get a better job. Why are we doing this kind of stuff? Because we want to buy a house and have a family and grow up and live the dream, right? Everything we do is about sex. Probably we don't think about it that way, but really it is. It's about reproduction. And once we get past that, I think that's one of the reasons why people in their 80s are so much happier, is they go up that age scale because they're free of all that, right? They're out of that game. And that's amazing to me, that whole chart I read today. Really and I wasn't going to talk about it, but here I am talking about it because I think it's really interesting. I think Ragesh has a question. Could you pass the mic back to him?
Yeah, this concept of everything is about sex. I agree with that, but
You can disagree.
there's two things I want to talk about that will throw some light. The first one is funny. The sex toys, the remote controlled. You know, you can have a lover on the other side of the continent, and you can help each other go through the evening, right? You know what I do for a living.
Yeah, I just thought of the same thought.
Cybersecurity, right? So I saw this case in the UK where this company that makes vibrators for the next generation it's all Wi-Fi control. So they hired a pen test guy to see if
To hack him, of course.
Some lady across in Scotland was enjoying something that was not from her husband. Okay, it was a hacker that hacked in and controlled that vibrator. So that's
You're
the
making
funny.
me blush now.
It was
Knew it
really
was going to happen.
He was a very good hacker. But the other context is a bit more serious for me because we haven't touched on it, and that's spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about procreation. Sex is about, for me, I mean, when I look at,
Yeah.
creation is the byproduct of a spiritual connection. When you mentioned Sandra Bullock, I was going to actually think about that, how when she takes the pill,
Yep.
and she experiences all the emotions of actually the physical act of sex without actually having the physical. You know.
Yep.
It was an emotional experience, which is a spiritual experience.
Exactly. And that's
She-
and that's in line
so
with
a
what,
human thirst is
Yeah.
for spiritual satisfaction.
and that's in
It's
line
not-
with what Tesla was saying.
That's what I was,
Yeah.
That's when you mentioned the energy aspect
Right.
of it. He was saying there's an explosion of energy. It's a connection with whatever God you want to practice believing in, but it's a connection with some inner, the Buddhists say the inner Buddha or whatever, but
Yeah.
so it's,
Yeah, and it gets complicated as we move into the future because do these, what are really extremely advanced masturbation techniques, I mean, that's really what they are. Do they change that? And I think that's your question really at the end of the day is, does that change that? Can it get in the way of it and can it break that? And it might. We don't know. We have to cross that barrier because in the far future, sex doesn't matter, right? Once we get off of biology, the whole question of biological reproduction becomes different.
because
Right?
then you have to ask, what is sex?
Right.
Is it some physical act, or is it some
Or is it mental?
spiritual
Yeah.
nourishing?
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. But I think we have to take that next step, and that's why I stuck near term. I didn't go out really far into the future here, because I think this is a near term exercise in the next 50 years, maybe even 30 years, where we have to explore these things and learn and teach ourselves. Ooh, we did that. Oh, we don't want that. Whoa. Ooh, we did that. Yeah, that was good. Everybody liked that, and it didn't affect our relationships, and that fit with us, right? But we have to experiment and try. And some of these are going to be failed experiments, and some of them are going to have tragic consequences. I don't talk a lot about the tragic consequences of technology, but you guys know they're out there, right? There's a lot of things that we're doing that we know have tragic, and I love it from HBO, these violent delights have violent ends. It's a great saying. There's a lot of things we're doing that are not going to end up well for us, but that's okay. We'll learn from those, and we'll move on. There's all kind of things happening in the world right now that make the world seem a terribly dangerous and unsafe place. But you guys know that's not true. This is the safest it's ever been to be on this planet. Humans are not killing each other in mass numbers. They're actually having a lot of sex. but they're not producing a lot of babies, and they're not getting sexual diseases. Things are changing very rapidly now. And when we start building these things, oh my God, we're going to get a whole new raft of new questions that we don't know the answers to. And I think that's cool. But to your point, I don't want it to break the fidelity of human relationships. Those are hugely important, and the spiritual connection that people share. Yeah. Right, and that's what I'm saying, when they have when you make that connection with somebody and you have sex with them, it is hopefully something much greater than the act, right? And I think with the technology that we're building, it could be that with a sufficiently advanced technology. It might be another person with a technology bridge, or it might be an artificial person with a technology bridge. And then what does that mean for us? I don't know. That's why I want to talk about it. That's why I wanted to have this session and get all your ideas. Please.
That was intelligent. The thing that goes one step beyond sex, because you were basically saying that sex was driving everything. But in fact, sex is subsumed under the general category of feedback.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that drives sex is that you're perceiving yourself essentially through the interactions with another person or the fantasy connected with a robot. And that feedback loop is the thing that drives everything else.
Absolutely.
For example, if you become an architect and you're building a building and it stands and looks pretty, etc., then you're satisfied, not just because the building looks good and you're going to get a lot of money for it, but because the building becomes an extension of you, because you have created that. And that tells you that you are a person that is capable of doing great things.
Yep.
And so sex also falls into that category of the feedback loop, that having somebody, as you have said, and as your name, Logan, as both of you and myself seem to be in agreement on, the important thing is what this does to the psyche, to the experience of life in general. Is sex should be a celebration, basically. It's not something that you could do all the time because you'd get tired of it and bored, and that would be the end of that. And you'd be very depressed probably, because what else are you going to replace it with? Because sex is the circuitry, the brain circuitry, if I recall correctly, for sex is connected with 2 or 3 other things. And that's unfortunate in one sense, multitasking like that, because it makes everything sexual.
Everything is sexual. I think it is like that. I think we are wired like that. You know, there's an abundance of research that shows that people that have sex get less diseases. I mean, it's just on and on and on. There was diseases. There was something I read today that was unbelievable. It was probably not true. Fake news, an up-and-coming subject on AEON3. But it was about male sperm and the health effects it has for females. And this was an actual study. And it was amazing. And it was the first one I'd ever read like that, and I find it hard to believe because it seemed kind of like, come on, that can't be true. But apparently this is what their research showed, that women that have sex are healthier and have less instances of all kinds of female diseases if they have a reoccurring stable partner. So it's interesting. Different animals breed differently. When you look at birds are pretty monogamous until they're not. It's really interesting. Birds are very similar to humans. They have committed relationships and they cheat occasionally. It's because they're trying to, and they don't think about it this way, but what it does, it introduces new genes into the gene pool and keeps their genetic pool healthy. But it's kind of an interesting thing. You wouldn't think that something totally monogamous would exit, but like humans, lots of other animals do that too.
There is a really, really excellent book entitled Sex at Dawn, D-A-W-N. And what it does is basically lay out a paradigm for human sexuality, which is 180 degrees at odds with the one that we have been using. And basically what they're saying is that we are, our sexual behavior is most closely modeled by that of the bonobos.
Yeah.
And the bonobos use sex for everything. for communication, for settling disputes, anything, any kind of problem. First thing you do is have sex. Well, that's the impression I've gotten. And
It's good to be a
and
bonobo.
the way they have sex is a multiple male, single female model.
Yeah.
Not the one that we have adopted, because our assumption was that that would violate principles of evolution. What we really should have is the one male, many female model, in which the male can track his sperm, basically, because he's there to defend the women and make sure they don't have.
Well, and interesting, throughout time we have. So you guys know that, like, I don't know the exact numbers, so I'm just going to guess here, but it's like 1 in 5 people can trace their genetic lineage to Genghis Khan, because he basically bred with like 16 women a day, every day, for his entire life. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of work. I wouldn't even want that job. That's like, oh my God, 16 more? Bring them on. How many is that, an hour? 2 an hour? That's a terrible work day. I don't know how anybody could do that. But we did have times in the past where we had that society. And I'll tell you, it didn't work very well, which is interesting, because I get where you're going with the ape-human connection. But humans are apes, but we're our own specific kind of ape. We're different than other apes. And that's interesting about us, because we are still an animal, right? But we have reason. And when we began writing things down and moved from the first eon to the second eon, that's when we began really tracking our sexual behavior, right? And understanding ourselves better. It's all the early philosophers, right? They wrote huge bodies of work around how we deal with sex and sexual relationships. And they crossed every kind of border they could do. They came up with every kind of structure they could come up with. And we do seem to always come back to what generates the highest amount of happiness is what you were saying, is a committed monogamous relationship that lasts for decades. And they're in and out of love during that time, and in and out of lust, right? It goes all over the place. And sometimes other people intrude. But as long as they stay together and they don't stray too far, when they get older, they tend to be happy. And it's humans are fascinating this way, because we violate all of our own rules. We come up with all these rules and then we break them all. And then we don't know why we're unhappy. I find that kind of interesting, because we are just working this out. The interesting part, I think, is as we move down the technological path, right, and we move towards AEON3, when we get to that space, the whole rules of biology thing changes. Because think about it. If you can live essentially forever, should you have sex to reproduce? No. Obviously not. A human that lives hundreds of years should not have sex to reproduce. That just flat out won't work. Humans that live 80 years, by the way, should not have sex to reproduce. And if you don't believe that number, just look at the world population numbers. Right? We're having a huge problem with people overrunning the planet. And the reason we're doing that is because we're having sex. It's a pretty direct equation. And we're living longer. And our children aren't dying at childbirth. And our technology is greater. Right? You guys have heard me talk about C-sections, my whole rap on that, right? As soon as we started doing C-sections, babies' heads got bigger. We have larger head sizes eventually. The number one limiter, by the way, for human evolution is the woman's birth canal. Our heads can't get any bigger. We've removed that now through C-sections. We used to do C-sections on emergencies, and now we're doing them for doctoral convenience. My golf game's on Thursday. Let's do a C-section on Tuesday. It'll be great. We're scheduling things. But what that means is bigger-headed babies, soon, in the very near future, it will be illegal for women to have natural birth because it would be dangerous. Right? It'd be a crime to have natural birth, because you've genetically introduced, in 2 generations, this will be true. This is inevitable, by the way. Babies will no longer be able to pass through the birth canal. It won't work anymore from this C-section genetic change. But what's the other answer? Let them die? Once they've seen Paris, they're not going back to the ranch, right? C-sections are the future. That's all babies are going to be born that way. Live with it. We gave that up. We didn't think about it. That's my point. When we make these changes and we introduce these technologies, we don't think about the repercussions, but they're links in a chain. And if you would have thought about what happens if I introduced, sorry, my camera died again. If you introduce babies into the gene pool in mass that have the genes for larger heads that all throughout human history would have died, right? And probably taken the mother out with them. Suddenly they all survive. You've changed the genetic makeup of all human beings forevermore. And we're never going back. You can't undo that. You can't turn that back, right? Unless you start using gene manipulation to make people dumber with smaller heads. We're not going to do that. This gets really complicated in the next 50 years. The next 50 years are going to be really complicated. The next 100 years is going to be spectacular. And at the end of it, we're not going to be anything like what we are now. So as we move towards that and we remove biology, right? Biology no longer controls us. We control biology. The role of sex in our lives must change. Therefore, we must explore all these things now, right? We got to get it past us. We got to get over it. We got to figure these things out. We can't stay where we are because where we are is where we've been for hundreds of thousands of years. And that's not where we're going. Get it? So I don't view these things as like dangerous or scary or frightening. I view them as absolutely necessary. Some of them are bizarre. Like having sex with a robot, I find bizarre. It's bizarre in concept. Why would I do that? It's not a person. But that's the whole point. It's not a person. There's no repercussions of any kind. What if it was a organic person that wasn't a person? Well, okay, now I'm less creeped out. But really, I should be more creeped out, right? Because what does that even mean? So, I don't view any of this as bad. I view this as all interesting, and it's a necessary step to get us off of sex for reproduction, which is what we're on now. And it means our relationships are going to change, to your point, Ragesh. That whole thing that happens when we have that moment. How do we reproduce that in a technological way that might not ever mean actual physical contact? And I think we can do that in our minds with technology. I think we can get there pretty quick. And I think that's important because that then enables us to move towards that, okay, we don't need to have sex to reproduce anymore. So the history of sex coming up to this point has been really interesting. I think where it's going to go from here forward is going to be even more spectacular.
I'd like to say some more, but maybe somebody else would like to. Is it okay? Okay.
We're not recording anymore for anything. If anybody wants to say anything. So yeah, the
Yeah.
phone died. Sure.
Oh, you do? This is really bizarre. I think for most people, if they're in a lecture somewhere or a discussion like this, they're glued into the discussion, and then their minds start wandering and off the subject of sex. Here, this is about sex, and my mind is wandering off. So it's already affecting us. It's really strange. But some other applications of this that aren't necessarily explicitly sexual, but they seem pretty profound to me. One would be mostly when we've discussed this, we've talked about one-on-one relationships, one person, one human, and one android.
Yeah.
But if you have, say, one-to-many, but I'll get back to that later. One of the applications I hadn't heard mentioned is mentors. We don't need universities anymore. We can, if we get really good mentors, they can have one-on-one relationships with great minds. And other things too, like what we thought we knew about human beings, pretty fundamental things would be challenged. Here's a minor example: the Maslowian hierarchy of values. I wonder if we put in these values that we're talking about, I wonder if those what we thought we knew about human beings, for fulfillment, is even true anymore.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And even if it is true now, will it be true in 20 years? You know, because it's changing, and things that we think right now we know how it works and we understand it. Those are going to be the first things that the young people throw out.
Yes, and another application. Right now we have a very large population, and many people die, and they die in misery or alone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so labor intensive to. Yes, so if we had robots who could keep them company.
It's lovely. That's a lovely thought. I mean, I hadn't thought about that. That's really true. Going beyond the sex thing into the telepresence, physical state. You know, what if if my mother's dying right now. You know, she's not dying right now. She's going to die at some point in the near future, but she's actually very good right now, which is awesome. But at some point, she's going to move on, and we keep having scares, which is very common. You know, when you get to that time frame in your life that suddenly you have a bad day and it's really bad, and everyone and how do we all rush together, right? It's impossible because we're all over the place. And then she's alone in some horrible place, and we're not there with her, and I feel really bad. What if we could all, in her mind, be in the same room, right? And it's really us. It's not like a fake us. It's really us, right? So I think this whole mental telepresence thing, the way we'll start is with sex. Because that's the way we started the internet. That's the way we started films. That's the way we started television. That's the way we start everything, right? That's the first thing we do. We take this technology and we explore what we can do with it sexually. But then get past that and move into the real useful part of some of this technology. Yeah, the way it got paid for was, okay. But now we got something that's really cool that we can use for lots of other things. Yeah.
A Google a worker gave a lecture at UC Irvine a couple of years ago that I got very involved in, where there were so many sensors that they were developing, so many types of sensors, and they were accumulating so much information that they weren't quite sure what to do with all of this. But it occurred to me that if a person was wearing this multiplicity of sensors for much of his life, that some supercomputer that we would have in the future could know so many things about
Sure.
that person and even anticipate what that person might say.
So this is what we call the merger of AI and big data.
AI and what?
Artificial intelligence and big data. And this is coming. So right now we have big data. One of the things that once you build big data, do you understand the concept big data? I don't want to.
Big data? Is that
Big
what you
data,
said?
yeah.
I was having trouble hearing you.
So what big data means is that we just are gathering huge amounts of information. Like, for instance, if you had sensors all over your body, and all throughout the last 20 years of your life, they were recording things, that's big data, right? You've got this huge treasure trove of data. Once you have data, the only way to make it useful is through artificial intelligence. So about 10, 15 years ago, we started working on big data. If I was going to put my money down on what would be next, it would be artificial intelligence.
Artificial what?
Intelligence. What comes after artificial intelligence? What'd you say? You can't, because you need something else.
I didn't hear what you said.
Merging. She said merging the data and the AI. But you can't, because you need something else. Nope. You need something else. Computing power. Our computing power today is not sufficient to use artificial intelligence to calculate big data. It takes too much computing power to make it practical.
But that isn't what the Google person said. He extrapolated the growth, and it looked like this was inevitable. And so,
Well, all this is we got louder all of a sudden. All this is inevitable. It's all about time, when, and there's an order to the way things happen, and I call it the chain links, right? The links. So if you build the internet, then you're going to build marketing. Then you build marketing, you need to capture data. You're going to build big data. Once you build big data, you have to build artificial intelligence. Once you build artificial intelligence, you want to use it to look at big data, but you can't because you don't have enough computing power. So the next thing that's going to explode is going to be quantum computing. Absolutely. Yeah. And everybody knows this. Everybody that does computer science knows the next thing we need is quantum computing. We need a huge explosion, an exponential growth, not these stupid, every 16 months we double the processing power, artificial stuff that Intel has created. We need like 1,000 orders of magnitude growth in computer processing power so that we can manage this. What's the next thing we need? A change in the way we store data. We'll no longer be able to store data the way that we're storing it because we'll be generating so much data that our current storage mechanisms will fail, right? And on and on and on. Each link you forge causes the next link to happen. And this isn't just in this subject, this is in all subjects. This is my whole rap that I give all the time that's leading us to this big change.
There's already a shortage of data storage
Yeah.
by a factor of about 2 to 1. So they're having to erase stuff that you thought was sacred and would never be touched. All the stuff that was backed up from the various...
It's a huge problem. Because think about what you're losing, right? Why would we ever lose that? Why would we erase anything? Any data you erase to an AI is a loss of context, right? We need that. And we're getting kind of off the subject of sex. But as we move down this path, these things all matter because this is all what this is about, is building up so that we can make this leap. But like I said earlier, I think the most important thing in this subject is we have to go through this exploration phase. And we have to kind of take ourselves up and out of ourselves and imagine us doing that. And we have to introduce these new players because they're going to be the future, right? These artificial things. And if you look at everything in the media, I mean everything, it's all about this subject, right? This is the number one topic in the media right now because you want to talk about it. You want to experience it. You want to buy it. You want to go there. That's why you watch Westworld and why you watch Blade Runner and why you watch all these shows and Dark Mirror and all that stuff. They're all about this subject because this is not way out there in AEON3. This is the next 20 to 30 years. This is right there, right on top of us. Make sense? And I think it's cool. I think it's really cool. I've watched my daughters do stuff I would never imagine that would work. And it totally worked for them. It was beautiful. It was just totally different. My daughter dated a guy from Canada for a year before she ever met him. In a very deep, committed relationship. And they'd never met. I'd never seen anything like it. It was an eye-opening experience. And it was totally awesome. And something that, as I look at it now, man, if I was young and dating, I don't have to date somebody that's like in my neighborhood? Whoa. That's wild. Wait, that was Keanu Reeves right there. Whoa. Well, we're way over time, as usual. It's 8:30, so I'm going to go ahead and thank you for on Facebook because that's the only camera working anymore. And look us up on YouTube. It's AEON3 is the YouTube channel. Or look us up on Facebook, and it's just the Doc Huntington Beach, at the Doc Huntington Beach on Facebook. Thanks very much. Thank you.